Japan is unique. Japan has a distinct work culture. At so-called shukatsu, companies typically only hire new staff once a year. As they gear up in black suits, soon-to-be grads expect to land a lifetime job. You know how foreign workers fit in, though? Working for a Japanese corporation is not something I wish to do. Living there as a foreigner is the worst thing in the world. It's a reciprocal feeling. Japan has a strong sense of cultural values that they are justifiably trying to preserve. However, there's a problem. By 2017, Japan's population is expected to have dropped to 87 million from its 2010 peak of 128 million. They have some of the lowest birth rates and the oldest population in the world. Japan needs more working-age individuals. They have an outward gaze. To fill labor shortages, they hope to attract more immigrant workers to their country. Their traditional work culture is being overhauled. Lifetime employment and those absurdly lengthy workdays are something they wish to abolish. However, is this the solution to Japan's issues? Can they defend themselves against the negative effects of mass immigration? Japan uses hindsight in this way. Japan's image is associated with fading greatness in the West. They emerged as an economic giant in the middle of the 20th century after being a formidable military force during World War II. For many years, their economy grew at the quickest rate in the world, and it was anticipated that they would eventually surpass the US as the leading global power. In many respects, much like how we currently view China. However, their economy crashed, and Japan hasn't recovered yet. Japanese society was profoundly impacted by this. Their aging and declining population is currently one of the most urgent problems. As healthcare advances and Japanese people become less inclined to have more children, these issues are predicted to worsen. The primary cause of Japan's current severe changes in work practices is the ensuing labor shortages. A little perspective first, though, before we get into that. Japan was devastated following World War II. Millions of veterans were returning to the workforce, but they lost a fourth of their industrial capability. They had an excess of workers. Japan was still seen as a developing nation with comparatively low living standards. Just behind China, their economy was the seventh largest in the world, but they were on the verge of a financial miracle. Their large labor force kept exports cheap and salaries low. Japan launched an economic boom after making significant investments in technology and industry. The keiretsu, very vast commercial networks that frequently received government support, rose to prominence during this time. A distinctive workplace culture developed as a result. Literally meaning job hunting, the shukatsu became a routine. Early April was a common time for these gatherings. Students did not receive a job description when they applied for positions at companies. They were supposed to work for the same company for the rest of their lives in whatever capacity their management saw appropriate if they were employed. Strict guidelines were in place on proper conduct at work. You were not allowed to leave before your supervisor did, and working overtime was the rule rather than the exception. Seeing Japanese employees dozing off on the metro is still somewhat typical. Karoshi, a word used by the Japanese, literally translates to death by overwork. However, Japan's economy rose extraordinarily quickly thanks to hard effort, astute policies, and good fortune. They surpassed Germany, France, and even the United Kingdom. Given all of this, some people think they could surpass the Soviet Union in just 15 years. Japan was once thought to be a poor country, and its goods were frequently regarded as being of low quality and low cost. However, that had changed by the 1970s. Japanese leadership literature were read all over the world, and their workplace procedures, such as complete quality control, became the norm. In the past, it was common practice to inspect a product's quality at the conclusion of production. Quality control became harsh as a result. When a car factory found a flaw, they wanted to blame sales, who then attempted to transfer the issue to service. However, Japan discovered a superior method. They urged departments to identify methods to improve output and to report any flaws at any point. It was revolutionary. With the help of the United States, who had by far become their biggest export market, they also invented just-in-time production and cross-functional product teams. Their goal was to make Japan a model ally and an example of capitalism in Asia. In the middle of the 1980s, something changed. At a meeting held at the Plaza Hotel in New York, Japan, the United States, and a number of European nations struck an agreement to devalue the dollar relative to the yen and the German Deutsche Mark. The goal was to lower the cost of American exports, but it accomplished something else instead. Japan went on a spending spree when it significantly raised their purchasing power in the U.S. Columbia Pictures was acquired by Sony. Mitsubishi acquired a majority stake in New York's Rockefeller Center. Some U.S. politicians felt a little worried about this. The U.S. military had grown reliant on Japanese technology, particularly their chips, and there were rumors that Japan wished to re-establish itself as a military power in Asia. The Japanese were now oversupplying the American market with their products, which ranged from Walmart to Toyotas. Japan eventually surpassed the Soviet Union after continuing to rise in the standings. They might surpass the United States by the year 2000, according to some analysts. Japan had remarkable growth. The Nikkei 225, a stock market index of the top publicly traded firms in Japan, is one of the primary indicators of the country's economic health. Its value surged sixfold in the 1980s. When Ronald Reagan took office, he launched an onslaught, accusing Japan of unfair economic practices and demanding sanctions. He forced Japan to reduce its chip development and imposed levies on Japanese imports, primarily automobiles and electronics. Japan obeyed. These sectors emerged in South Korea and Taiwan as a result of the collapse of their chip industry, but Japan faced more significant issues. The price increase of Japanese imports into the U.S. was another effect of the Plaza Accords. Real estate prices skyrocketed as a result of Japan's economic policies that promoted investment in the sector. Land in Tokyo would eventually fetch $139,000 a square foot, which is almost 350 times the price of land in Manhattan. This implied that the Imperial Palace's grounds were worth more than California as a whole. Everyone knew that disco had collapsed, but nobody wanted to cause too much trouble. Those who believed the party would last forever filled Juliana's nightclub. The mother of all hangovers was about to hit them. Thousands upon thousands of West Germans arrived to argue that the wall has abruptly lost its significance. The Nikkei collapsed just a few days after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Naturally, there was a huge sell-off this morning as a result of people's worry. It was a financial catastrophe. People are extremely pessimistic about the Japanese economy. While the West had an economic boom following the conclusion of the Cold War, Japan saw a sharp decline. Too much investment was speculative, real estate was grossly overpriced, and credit had been too easy to obtain. Then, as a result of the government's inadequate response to fundamental problems, Japan would go through one of the most difficult periods in its contemporary history. Now, Japan is prepared for expansion, yet many businesses struggle to recruit employees. Companies need 25% more workers across all industries, but in some, like construction, they need 5 times as many. Although immigration is a touchy subject, this is the primary reason Japan is looking abroad. Japan has long been worried about the impact of immigration on social stability and harmony. Some worry that the cultural norms and values that have defined Japan for millennia may be upended by an immigration wave. Additionally, it is reciprocal. Learning Japanese might be challenging. The strict, hierarchical war culture of Japan is difficult for many foreigners to adapt to. Additionally, wages are not very competitive. Real wages in Japan have not increased at all during the last 30 years, despite the country once having some of the highest earnings in the world. Because of the weak yen, the Japanese currency, foreign brands are more expensive and your earnings are worth less elsewhere. It may appear to an outsider that Japan is far less expensive than it ever was, but this is untrue if you are paid in Japan. With barely over 3% of the population being foreign-born, Japan has become one of the most homogeneous civilizations in the world due to the relative unwillingness of the Japanese to accept immigrants and the low number of workers seeking to migrate. Critics contend that increasing birth rates ought to be the main priority. They have already raised childcare and school subsidies, but these policies are mostly intended for married couples with children. Others contend that there should be incentives for more women to work. Compared to women in the U.S., Japanese women already have one of the highest rates of labor force participation in the world, but there is still room for improvement. Japan has the largest gender salary disparity and one of the lowest percentages of women in politics. Due to depressing career prospects, expensive living expenses, and a work culture that makes it hard for both partners to provide, women frequently do not work and couples frequently do not have children.